Tonight's going to be a little bit different than normal. It's going to be different than a normal sermon or a Bible study because I'll use some passages of Scripture here and there. And if you need a Bible, there's a Bible on your table. But I'm not going to be going verse by verse through a specific text to understand its meaning, how it connects to the gospel, applying it to our lives. That's not really the point of tonight. And why not? Two reasons. First, we're answering broad questions that people have, challenges to faith in God, which generally can't be addressed with like a single passage of Scripture. And so we can't just say, hey, we're going to look at this one passage of Scripture so we can answer this one big, broad topic tonight. But secondly, if you're somebody that's questioning Christianity, and you already have doubts about trusting what the Bible says, then chances are you don't really see the Bible as much of an authority anyway. And so while we're going to use the Bible because we can't understand the position of Christianity without the Bible, I want to meet you guys where you are by answering and relating to some of these questions first with kind of the way that the world and our culture also thinks of them. Even though tonight we're going to be unpacking, while we might start with a question generally, we'll end our evening looking at the Bible specifically. So for tonight's question, we posted it on our website, on social media. Really, we could ask it two different ways, I think. First way, isn't it arrogant to believe that Jesus is the only way to God? Maybe that's something, if you are a Christian, maybe that's something you've heard before. If you're not a Christian, maybe that's something you've experienced before. Maybe it's something you feel now. Or to put it another way, how can Christianity profess to be loving? Like, how can we as a religion be loving if Jesus claims to be the only way to God? And so whether you ask it, like, isn't it arrogant or it can't be loving, either way, the idea, the topic tonight is we're looking at this topic of exclusivity and Jesus claiming to be the only way to God. Hey, buddy. And there's really two challenges that we have to answer tonight. You gonna sit there, man? There's two challenges that this question's raising and two things that I want us to look at tonight. Does Christianity as a belief system eliminate our personal freedom? Because especially in the West, that's a big value for us, right? Feeling free and autonomous, able to make our own decisions. Is Christianity, is it like a straitjacket that limits what we can do and the way we can live and be? But secondly, does Christianity cultivate intolerance and division by presenting there's just one way to God? And because there's only one way to God, and it's my way or the highway, we're going to look down on everybody that shows in a different way. That's really the two kind of angles that people might take to this particular objection. Now maybe this sounds like a non-issue to you. The idea of Jesus being the only way to God, like maybe you think of it as a non-issue because you believe that Christianity and Jesus is just one path to God or to spiritual enlightenment, just like there's many other paths. Maybe you've heard that before. Like Jesus is one way, but there's several different ways, and they're all kind of getting toward the same general truth. Is Christianity actually exclusive, or is it just one of many equally valid options? And I think that this is a good place for us to start. And if we look in the Bible, the central figure of Christianity, Christ, he doesn't allow believing in him to be just one of many options for spiritual life. So John chapter 14 in the New Testament, John 14 verse 6, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So that's pretty clear. Like Jesus himself claimed that he is the only way to God. And when you think behind the logic of that statement, and you think about Jesus' death and resurrection and why he died, it makes sense. Like imagine that a father works for a train company at a drawbridge. And his responsibility in the late night shift is when trains are coming across the drawbridge, he has to raise it up so that way the trains can come by. And whenever the trains finish coming by, he has to lower it so that way any vehicles can come by or any boats can come by. So this is his job, right? And because of the timing, because of his family situation, one night he happens to have his son with him. And he's like, hey, we're gonna make a good time of this. Like we're gonna stay up late, we'll play games. I know the schedule of when trains are coming. And so his child is with him there for that shift that night. But then as he realizes the train is approaching and it's getting closer, he looks for his son and he can't find him. He calls out to his son, and sure enough, his son is in the tracks of the drawbridge. Now he's faced with a choice. As he sees the train's lights approaching, he can raise the bridge and save the people on the train, all the people on the passenger train, but crush his son. Or he can save his son and let all the people of the train drive off the cliff. That sounds like an awful choice, right? And if the man were to, you would feel and sympathize for the man, whichever choice he makes. But if the man were to choose to raise the bridge and crush his son, and then you find out that actually the train's coming in 2 more hours, and he could have simply gone out there and saved his son and then raised the bridge and done it just like normal. If there was any other way, and the man knew there was another way, and yet he still chose to crush his son, we'd think about the man differently. We wouldn't pity him. We would think of him as a monster. We would think of him as evil because he didn't spare his own son when there was no reason for him to do it any other way. Like, this is what Christianity leaves other religious beliefs with. That if God can reconcile humanity to himself through any other way, then what kind of God is he that he would crush his very son to do it still? And so not only does Jesus say, I am the only way and the truth and the life, no one comes to the Father but through me. But if there is any other way to the Father, then I don't know we can trust that kind of God that still chooses to crush his own son. And so this is the challenge that Christianity leaves us with, this problem of exclusivity. Christianity doesn't allow itself to simply be another option. If Christians are right in their beliefs about God, then faiths like Islam or Judaism have severely misunderstood the nature of God. And other faiths like Buddhism completely miss the mark, or even acknowledging that there is a creator God. But the same is also true the other way around. If Islam is right about its beliefs about Jesus, or if Judaism is right about its beliefs about Jesus, then Christianity has massively misunderstood the nature of God. See, our belief system as Christians, it's inherently exclusive. And so if that's something that you're exploring and you're processing what it means to follow Jesus, do I believe that the Bible is true? Like, that's the starting point for us here. But why is that such a problem for so many people? To say that there is some kind of objective truth and that Christianity doesn't allow for many other options. Why is that a challenge? Because for a lot of people, that is one of the main reasons why they wrestle with considering any faith claims in the Bible. And for starters, I think many people see claims that absolute truth exists as nothing more than schemes to establish power and to use it to control over people. I don't know if you've ever watched the TV show Parks and Recreation, or Parks and Rec, but there is a group in Parks and Rec called the Reasonableists. And in this sitcom, this is a cult that believes that they have figured out the day the world is going to end because Zorp the Surveyor, a 28-foot tall lizard god, is going to come down and incinerate the earth. And these primarily older gentlemen have figured out when he's coming. There's been a book that's been written about it. And so, like, on their Armageddon day, they rent out some space in the park so that way they can all gather together and play their music and have this big celebration before the end of the world. Now, one of the main characters from Parks and Rec, like your everyday man, Ron Swanson, he sees that they believe in this absolute truth that the world is going to end. And so what does he do? He sells them musical instruments that he made and whittled. And he sells them at an super expensive rate because, like, you can't take it with you. So why not just go ahead and spend the money? And we've seen this in several cults where the leader has a direct channel to God. We also see it in politics where fear drives the agenda. We see it in intimate relationships between people where people use truth claims all the time to control and take advantage of other people. And this is a big reason why I think culturally people are incredibly suspicious, not just of Christians, but that anyone would claim that they know some kind of absolute truth. But even when people aren't suspicious of truth claims, they're still often turned off by them. And maybe that's you. Like maybe you're not necessarily suspicious of Christianity, but once we start talking words like exclusivity and that there's only one way to God, maybe it makes you feel a little bit uneasy. Believing that something would impose on another person, it's considered arrogant in our culture. How can you claim to have found the only way to God? What makes you so special? Like, what makes you smarter than everybody else? Maybe these are questions or statements that you've heard or that you felt yourself. But agnosticism, or claiming to simply not know what's fully true and just attempting to live a good life, it's sometimes considered the morally superior way. And people might even throw in the more tolerant way. You might be familiar with this old story of blind men that encounter an elephant. And none of them know what an elephant looks like. They've never seen an elephant. And so one of the blind men, he reaches up and he touches the side of the elephant. And so he exclaims, the elephant is massive and strong like a great wall. Now the next blind man, he comes up and he touches the trunk of the elephant. And he thinks, like, well, no, an elephant is actually slender and bendable like a snake. And then the next blind man, he comes up and he touches the tusks and says, no, you're both wrong. He's sharp and pointy and dangerous like a spear. And this has been used over the years. The moral of the story is that, each of us have a different way of approaching God in the supernatural. And we're all kind of coming and trying to just process blindly the same thing, but we're all just experiencing part of the bigger picture. And so this is the general idea of agnosticism. Maybe there's a God there, but all of us are seeing a different part of him, and all of us are one of many different paths to learn about him. The problem with that illustration, the problem with the whole story, is that it's being told from the perspective of somebody who isn't blind. It's being told from the perspective of somebody that can actually see and behold and understand an entire elephant to be able to tell the blind men each of them only has a part of the puzzle. By its own logic, claiming that no one can fully know the truth ends up becoming the most arrogant and exclusive of our truth claims. Trying to avoid making exclusive truth claims, it ends up imploding on itself. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Abolition of Man, he speaks to this. He says, you cannot go on explaining away forever. You'll find that you've explained explanation itself away. Maybe you've experienced that in our culture. He says you cannot go on seeing through things forever. The whole point of seeing through something is to see something through it. It's good that the window should be transparent, Lewis says, because the street or garden beyond it is opaque. But what if you saw through the garden too? A wholly transparent world is an invisible world. To see through all things is the same as not to see. See, even the claim that absolute truth is only a scheme to gain power, it has to follow its own logic, which inevitably makes itself a claim to gain power. There has to be something opaque. There has to be something visible through the window. Otherwise, our experience in life is meaningless. But that's not to say that exclusive truth claims that they don't create challenges for Christians. And those of us that are believers, we need to acknowledge that claiming absolute truth, it does create challenges because bias is a real barrier to considering beliefs you don't hold. But this is also true for everyone. If exclusivity is a challenge for believers and for Christians, then it's a challenge for every human being because exclusivity in our human experience, it's philosophically unavoidable. To believe in something necessitates that we don't believe in something else. Even to say, I don't believe in any absolute truth is to state that truth. Absolutely. Like to see how these things end up defeating each other. The belief systems that we each individually carry, they create inherently this problem of exclusion. You could think of two different groups of people. You could think of somebody that sat on the board for Planned Parenthood and someone that sits on the board for a crisis pregnancy center. Both have very different moral values. Both are sitting on opposite ends of the political spectrum about a very heated issue. But then all of a sudden, the board member for Planned Parenthood has a miscarriage. The board member for the crisis pregnancy center has a family member who becomes pregnant after being raped. Their opinions and their beliefs all of a sudden become a lot more gray about where they stand in terms of the idea of abortion. And it would make sense. We wouldn't fault Planned Parenthood or the Crisis Pregnancy Center for looking to remove that person from their board, as their beliefs change around a very specific issue. Or maybe another way exclusive claims are shaping our world is we could think around the topic of diversity, because that's something else that we talk about a lot today. And diversity is something that our culture largely praises, but the very idea of diversity assumes that there are distinctions we believe are true about ourselves that aren't true about others. So my son, Oliver, has been running all over here this morning. To be Oliver Russell is to not be Rob Russell. I'm standing still. To be Rob Russell is not to be Oliver Russell. To be white means that I'm not black. To be left-handed means that I'm not right-handed. Like whether these things are biologically or set or they're personally chosen, we're all inherently some things and not other things, which is not a bad thing. And according to the Christian worldview, it's a beautiful thing that demonstrates an infinitely creative and personal God. Within our culture today, this sense of freedom and autonomy to exclusively define who we are, it's praised as this like supreme good. And maybe you've experienced that. Maybe that's what you hold yourself. But when we overvalue what sets us apart and makes us distinct from everyone else and make a good thing into an ultimate thing, this beautiful diversity that we have as a society, it eventually morphs into division and marginalization and oppression. We could think through a few examples around the topic of diversity in our identities. If we were to choose to find our ultimate sense of worth and find that in our wealth and our socioeconomic status, and that's what we think gives us value, then we end up forcing ourselves to feel superior or more accomplished to those that are less fortunate, since they fall short of what we think is valuable. You know, we could think in other areas. If the root basis for your identity is your morality and you think of yourself as a good person, ironically, you're going to look down on those that you find as morally inferior. Even if you see and approve of yourself primarily by how tolerant you are toward people who aren't like you. And that's the kind of person you want to be, and that's the core of who you are. You set yourselves up to demonize those that you consider as narrow-minded and bigoted, and ending up becoming the very thing that you say that you claim to be that you're not. Tolerance is now no longer a concern about other people, it becomes about us. In every instance, when we get our sense of self-worth from what makes us unique as people, or exclusive and distinct as people, we'll inevitably find ourselves at odds with some groups of people that we find as antithetical or antagonistic to the things that we think are fundamental to our identity and who we are. And I think that this is one of the concerns people have about Christianity, and maybe that's something that resonates with you. This fear that our exclusive claims about Jesus will lead to destructively excluding others or judging others. Another term for that's intolerance. And we're going to focus on that topic a little more in a few minutes. But what we've seen so far and what we've covered so far is that both the frameworks for religion and irreligion foster exclusivity. It's not actually something we can avoid in our human experience. So the question is, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with exclusive truth claims if we can't actually avoid them? And culturally in the West, I think our society tends to take one of three different approaches to how we treat claims of exclusivity and objective truth. And first, a very popular option in our culture is to weaken any focus on exclusive truth claims by emphasizing tolerance instead. Essentially, we try to pretend exclusivity is less present in our culture. We all believe the same thing. We're just going to emphasize the things that we do agree on and kind of, just lessen and weaken the fact that there's objective truth that we believe that is distinct. Hey, bud. Think of a magician's sleight of hand trick, where he gets you to look one direction while he does the trick somewhere else. Like, if I convince you right now that Oliver is doing back handsprings in the back of the room, and all of you immediately like, he's 2 years old, like he's a prodigy, and you want to look back and you want to watch. Macy wants to film, like everybody looks back there. But I do that just so I can smack my friend Jonah in the back of the head. Just because you're not looking at him getting smacked doesn't mean it didn't happen, right? Like, just because I put your attention over there, it doesn't mean that the real thing didn't happen right here. Just because non-religious people focus on the exclusivity of Christianity while promoting tolerance for their culture, it doesn't magically mean that they no longer suffer from their own issues with exclusivity or intolerance toward Christians, the very thing they claim to be for. But that's often our culture's second option for responding to exclusivity. If we don't weaken it, we try to vilify it. We try to attack it. We make it morally wrong to claim absolute truth that isn't shared by everyone. But this, once again, it's a self-defeating argument. Because attacking Christianity for making exclusive truth claims that you believe will inevitably hurt people turns out to be an exclusive truth claim that's leading you to hurt people. All we're doing is masking our judgment of others as a moral defense against culturally agreed upon claims of intolerance. But we end up doing the very thing that we say we're against. I have an iPhone. And I think I've only used iPhones since they came out. I remember having the first iPhone. But for some reason, I find it that a lot of my friends that have Android phones, they act in a very similar way toward iPhone users. And now we could also speak about the issues that iPhone users have, but that's not the point of this illustration. Maybe it's just insecurity, or maybe it's wanting to validate why they're so committed to their green text messages. But every time a new iPhone is announced with all of its new features and Apple puts on an event, like I can go to social media and pinpoint all of the Samsung or Google phone people because they're all saying the same thing. My phone's been doing that for years. Apple's just stealing their ideas. Like, yeah, my phone does so many more things. Like, they're so far behind. And I say that lightheartedly, but it's a natural inclination for us. When we feel left out of a group, because you're not a part of the better group, because you don't have an iPhone, we can either downplay it to hide how we feel, or we might lash out at the group for excluding us and try to defend it. I know Birkenstocks are back in style now. But I remember the first time they were trendy when I was in junior high or so. And back then, it was not the sandals that were in style. It was the clogs. I don't know if you've seen those. But my parents did not, Potato shoes. They were expensive. Right? And I remember growing up here in the North Shore, Joe's Shoes in Mandeville had them, and I couldn't find them in many other places. A lot of my friends would wear them, but I didn't have a pair. And I felt left out, but I would bounce back and forth between saying like, oh, I don't really care about them. Like, I play sports. I don't need to wear those shoes anyway. Like, I'm good with my Nikes. Like, it doesn't really matter to me. To like actively teasing people for them, saying that they look silly. And wearing Birkenstock potato shoes with jeans, like, why is that a thing? And yet, eventually, I got a pair. And I swear it was like the next month that they were no longer trendy. And because they were expensive and because I was late to the bandwagon, so I didn't really get to wear them that long before they were out of style anymore, Macy's already pointed out to people sitting around her, I still have them. They're still in my closet, waiting one day for them to all of a sudden be the next big thing again. We tend to do this whenever we see something that we feel left out of, and we might just attack it out of our own insecurities for it because we realize that we're not a part of it, rather than taking the time to understand and listen to it. The last option, because I mentioned there were three that we take in our culture toward exclusive truth claims, is door just open. Oh, okay. Is just to ignore them. So rather than vilify them, rather than weaken these claims, we just try to ignore them. We pretend that there's no fundamental difference among us. We pretend that what we believe doesn't require exclusivity. If you think that there's a problem with tolerance, then the problem must be you. Like, that's the idea. But that's not sustainable. When we don't know how to live with people who believe and act differently with us, and so we simply try to pretend those differences don't exist or they don't matter, then we don't ever develop the tools to actually practice reconciliation when divisions arise. We're just acting like that meme of the dog that's surrounded by fire in a room saying, this is fine. So whether we try to weaken them or vilify them or ignore them, all of the options our culture provides for handling exclusive truth claims and cultivating tolerance, they all fall short. Now, why is that? It's because they're based on the wrong assumption. Our culture assumes that objective truth eliminates our capacity for freedom and tolerance. But the Christian worldview actually claims the exact opposite. We mentioned at the beginning of our time that one of the root issues skeptical people often have when they bring up the issues of exclusivity in the Christian faith is their concern that the Bible's absolute truth claims limit our personal freedom. But the Bible at least claims that isn't the case. In the book of John, chapter 8, verses 31 and 32, it says, "So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, 'If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth,'" exclusive claim, "and the truth," exclusive, "will set you free." When our identity is based off our own creation of truth through our feelings or our experiences, then our self-worth is going to be inevitably held captive to the uncertainty of our circumstances, whether things change for us in our own lives. Our value in the world as people can't be free if it has to be personally achieved and maintained. However, when we receive something as objectively true from outside of us, then it doesn't depend on us for staying true. And that means that it can be a stable and dependable constant in our lives. So either way, our lives function on believing certain foundational truths that give our lives value and meaning. Again, even the claim to not hold any foundational truth, that is itself a foundational truth claim. Like, we can't avoid these kinds of claims. We can't escape believing in something as an absolute truth in an effort to be free and autonomous people, which means that true freedom, if that's your goal and that's how you're exploring Christianity, is I don't want to limit my freedom. True freedom is not about removing all exclusive truth claims in our lives as much as it is about finding the right ones. Finding the things to believe that will actually set you the most free in the rest of your life. I mentioned Parks and Rec, so I got to mention the sister show with The Office, its predecessor. That in one of its Super Bowl episodes, and probably the one that you get the clips from the most, is an episode where Dwight stages a fake fire in the office. Now, if you haven't watched the show, it was filmed so you don't have to know anything else that's going on in the show to just see him set some smoke off in one of the rooms, lock some doors, and heat up the door handles, and then have somebody yell out fire. And before you know it, there's cats flying from the ceilings, and people are breaking into vending machines to steal all of the food, and it's just entire pandemonium. At the end of that, one of the characters, Stanley Hudson, he collapses having a heart attack. And that's where you get Michael Scott, Steve Carell's character, taking one of the only black cast members in the main cast of The Office, and him trying to shove a wallet in his mouth to keep his mouth open, him yelling "Stay alive, Barack is president, Barack is president, Stanley." But after he comes back from the heart attack, naturally, he needs a chill life, right? He's got to keep his blood pressure at a certain level, but his boss is Michael Scott, and so he famously looks at the camera and says, "I'm going to die." And his little sensor on his wrist starts beeping every time his heart rate gets elevated, and that just happens to be any time that Michael Scott is approaching him. It's not simply a matter of, okay, I have to work and I have to live. I'm not just going to avoid those things, so I got to find the right situation to step into that's actually going to create the healthiest life that I can live. You think about other limits we have to our freedom. The athlete that wakes up at 4 a.m. so they can exercise and work out and practice their craft. They probably don't enjoy that, although for some reason a lot of them do, and that's why that's not me. But they take on some of those challenges because they want to perform at their best in the sport. If anyone's ever dieted, no one's been like, "I love dieting. I love not eating ice cream and all of my favorite foods. I love intermittent fasting. That's stupid. Breakfast is great." Why do you do that? Because the thing that you are limiting your freedom for, you want the freedom to be able to actually live a healthy life, to be able to be more active, to be able to wake up and not feel pain immediately, to be able to enjoy your life more. So you take on some restrictions to enjoy other freedoms. If there are beliefs that fit the reality of our world, that make rational and emotional sense, then why wouldn't we want to believe in them and orient our lives around them in order to experience more freedom and a flourishing life in a world in which those truths operate? If your car takes gasoline, you are more than free to put diesel in it. That is your choice. But I would argue that if you choose to use diesel, you'll ultimately be much less free to drive your car in the end, as it stops working. Because the God of the Bible is defined as one who has created the world, and we could cover that another time, but because that's the way he's defined himself, then receiving and giving love to him, disciplining ourselves to follow him, that would align ourselves to move along the natural grain of the world he created instead of exhaustingly fighting against it. Of course, this is exactly where people often struggle with the claims of Christianity. The Christian worldview simultaneously claims that there is absolute truth and that there is only one way to God. There is absolute truth, and we got it. Either claim by itself would feel daunting, but the two together might feel overwhelming. How can we place our faith in a supernatural, invisible God as an absolute truth without it making us intolerant and judgmental of those that are different than us? For the Christian, the person and work of Jesus gives us the answer. It can be difficult, and maybe this, if you're our third week in Questioning Christianity, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about the interplay between reason and doubt and faith. It can be difficult to believe in an invisible God is ultimately true, and I think it's okay for Christians to admit that, and to admit that for themselves personally, even as someone trying to follow Christ. With every religion and worldview offering their own explanation, it can feel like we're all those blind men that are touching the elephant. And if that were the case, it would be impossible for us to know for sure. Our uncertainty would be an impossible foundation for us to build a flourishing life upon. But the God of Christianity is not a blind man, and he has not left us blind by keeping himself invisible. He has made himself visible. The book of Colossians, which is where our church is going to start our first sermon series next month, chapter 1, verses 15 through 20, describes Jesus in this way. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in Jesus all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. God has not left himself invisible. We don't have to be blind men feeling the elephant. God has revealed who he is in the person of Jesus, giving us a visible source of truth. If you're a non-Christian or a skeptic, you're not going to understand the claims of the Bible or be able to determine their validity simply by analyzing the doctrine or even by observing its followers. Those are important things. Christianity has been made visible in a person. And so the foundational key to understanding and processing Christianity and whether or not it's true is to examine the life of Jesus and if he says who he says he is, if he is who he says he is. And like we started the evening, it was Jesus who made the claim of exclusivity. It's Jesus that said, no one comes to the Father but through me. When you look at Jesus' life in the Gospels, this exclusive claim to be the only way to God, it didn't remove his capacity for tolerance. No one actually claims that Jesus was intolerant when you look at the Gospels, even though he was very exclusive. Jesus is described as eating with the tax collectors and sinners, and as loving the least of these, as welcoming all the children to him. His apostles, his followers, like Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, when he visits Athens in Acts chapter 17, he takes the time to listen and understand the Athenians' religious beliefs with their pantheon of gods that he didn't believe in. And he takes the time to listen to them, and when he shares about Jesus, he starts with where they already believe in dialogue with where they're at, rather than simply belittling them for not believing the way that he does. See, the testimony of the Bible is that this exclusive claim of Jesus being the only way to the Father, it provides a pathway for loving others. And the greatest example of compassion within Christianity is the gospel itself. Again, Colossians 1, 19 and 20, for in Jesus all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. And then what did he do with that? Through Jesus reconciling to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace, reconciling by the blood of his cross. God didn't meet our discarding of his value by discarding us. Instead, he sent Jesus to suffer for us. See, the God of the Bible actually calls us to much deeper and holistic form of tolerance than anything our culture emphasizes today. Within the Christian worldview, tolerance is more than indifference or acceptance regarding the differences in other people's beliefs. Instead, the gospel of Jesus, it demonstrates that we should place a priority on loving and respecting those people who disagree with us on those very beliefs. And so as we close, since the Christian's identity, it's meant to be received from God rather than achieved in our own power and performance, we should never be in a place to live, we should never be someone who believes or lives differently than us and think that we're somehow superior to them. In this way, I really do believe that Christianity offers a way to practice true tolerance well in a very complex and diverse world, while still holding on to an exclusive belief that's the source for that love and the source for that tolerance. The topic. You might not like this about me. Hello. But I'll be the first to say I don't know. And if you're still thinking through what kind of church is this, what kind of church do we want to be, it's not meant to be built on the back of its pastor. As this guy that just simply knows everything and you come to him. I mean, I prepared and I read something. But now I don't have anything in front of me. And what I hope to do with this kind of environment is for us to be able to put questions out there and feel safe asking them, even if there's not resolution in the moment with them. But maybe that gives us insight into what we cover in the future, or we can continue the conversation personally. So, with that in mind, thoughts, questions? Do we have anything? Cool. Well, let's start there then.
All right, so first question of the night came in, said, why is the Christians Inspired by God book different from other religions inspired by God?
Well, I love basketball. So one debate that has been a long part of my life is Michael Jordan or LeBron James. Who's the greatest player to ever live? And you get insight into someone's personality and probably their age by the way that they answer the question too. So you can make if two opposing sides make the same claim, then just by sheer logic, both can be true. Now, the reality is of a question like, Jordan or LeBron, that's a subjective question, right? And depending on whether you want to go off of championships won, it'd be Jordan. You go off of, who has the better reputation, it'd be Jordan. You go off of playoff record, it'd be Jordan. I'm tipping my hat too. Loyalty to a team, it would be Jordan. But if both are making the same claim, then we don't have when somebody runs for office and they run unopposed, then you know who's going to be sitting next in office. Whenever there's an opposition in claims, what does that lead a good resident to do whenever there's two different candidates? To study the candidates. And so that would be my encouragement whenever you have, and we could take some that sound clearly opposed. So the Quran, that's going to see Jesus as a prophet, but be very clear and specific that he is not divine. Or the Bible, that's going to make the exact opposite case. And the way they talk about their holy books is going to sound very similar, which means that just like two candidates in a race, I think it's fair and reasonable to actually spend time exploring both and to study both. I say if we simply look at something from a logic standpoint, then I think we shortchange ourselves. If we simply look at something from an experiential or emotional standpoint, well, we lie to ourselves all the time with the things that we want. Where I think you find the sweet spot is the merger of those two things together. And I think I might have said this earlier. Looking for what makes rational and experiential or rational and emotional sense. Something that doesn't just simply fit the way of the world and can make sense intellectually, but actually believing it, and this is part of the claim of the Bible, stirs our delight in a God that made us for a purpose. But you can't hold those. Whether it's those two seem very opposed, but then you have two books that sit one side in. We go into Mormonism, and they have a secondary book that they're going to claim the Book of Mormon is also something that is an authority. And they're willing to say that, and we love the Bible too, let's bring it on. But then we look at the Bible, and the Bible's like, nope, it's just this. It's just this. Once again, we got to consider, I think it's unfair for us to simply say, well, this is the one I grew up with, and so this is the only one that I'm going to explore. Charles Spurgeon famously said, when he was asked to give a defense for the authority of Scripture, would I defend a lion? No, I just let him loose. And if the Bible is true, we don't really need to feel like we have to guard around it and make sure that we don't read other things that speak against it. No, it'll hold its weight, and we'll be able to take on scrutiny.
Good answer.
I feel encouraged.
If God is so powerful, then why didn't he just make a way for all religions to come?
Well, okay, we can take that question a few different directions.
That's a big one.
So we spent the whole summer studying Romans chapter 8, and that was intentional on my part because I love the book of Romans, but I need some time and maybe some like cachet with a church that I've pastored for a while to say, okay, we're gonna study the whole book of Romans together. It's a dense book. And Romans 8, as encouraging as it is, I don't know if you kept reading after last week. Romans 9 is a fun chapter. Romans 9 includes, it asks the question, all these Israelites that don't seem to follow Jesus, has the word of God failed? And it's going to explore that over the next few chapters. And he gets to a point, and I think it's verses 19 and 20 maybe in Romans 9, that Paul says, what if God, desiring to show his wrath and make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of destruction, prepared for judgment, in order to make light or to make famous vessels of mercy that he's going to show his mercy toward. And that's something that I don't want to make overarching claims on. What I want to say is the thrust, though, and the sentiment behind Paul's words there is that whether it be in God's showing justice against things that are not good and not of him, which sadly is stuff that's in us, myself included, every human, or it's God showing mercy on those that don't deserve it. Both of those, his justice and his mercy, are good things. Both of them deserve to be God be glorified because of those things. And we're going to look back on how God deals with people that don't believe in him and that experience the justice of God, or people that do believe in him and experience his mercy. And we're going to say that one, God did nothing wrong, and two, in both God was glorified. Now, how and the ways of how, I'm not God. And so I don't want to speak to that. Now, you could also take that whole question on a big old tangent to talking about free will and those kind of things. But at the heart of the question, I don't think our answer for why does God do this or why does God do that needs to focus on us. At the heart of the Bible is not this like really good chess maker that just has gotten great at being able to respond to us while we take the lead. Now, the sentiment we read in Romans 8 is that from before the beginning of time, God's had a plan to be able to make known his attributes through his people and his creation. And how he does that is something that we might not fully understand this side of eternity.
Okay. Next one is maybe they just need to get fleshed out a little bit more. I think you hit on this. Isn't it unloving to tell someone there is only one way to heaven?
Is it unloving to tell someone that they're driving on the wrong side of the street? That happened for me last week. The intersection is, if you guys don't live in Mandeville and you're heading back to 190 tonight, you will get to that intersection at the end of Monroe Street. where the Shell station's on the right. You could turn left to the Causeway. And that's like a classic New Orleans intersection where you could go somehow 7 different ways. There's an odd number of ways you can go. And I don't know when I put my turning signal on because I can turn right 4 different opportunities in one intersection. And so naturally last week, as I know where turn I'm taking, this poor lady, she turns right into oncoming traffic in the only street that was not for her. And you know what? I consider it a loving thing that I honked my horn loud, trying to get people's attention and trying to get her attention. And so I think that the answer to this question begs a follow-up question, because that to me seems the simplest answer is if you believe that that someone's hungry and you have bread, why wouldn't you offer it? It would be unloving not to. But then the follow-up question, this is kind of what we talked about tonight, is how dare you think that you're the only one that has bread? And that's where we need to go to what we've been looking at with Scripture, and that everyone is making some kind of claim to understand what bread is. Now, I'm a millennial, and so I grew up in what I call the free trial generation. And so, whether the illegal version of that was pirating music, with LimeWire and Kazaa and Napster and all of that. The legal version of it was I had like 15 email addresses at one point because I would just do a free trial of some kind of software and it would last for 15 days. And then I would create a new email address and I'd start a new free trial. I never had to pay for that software. And the reality is, especially at a new church that meets in something that's not a church building, we're normally going to be meeting in a theater a couple blocks from here. Part of creating a safe space for people means that I'm going to try this thing on, see what it feels like. I'll be a part of a community group, see if it fits my life. Now we know that there's something more spiritual and deeper than that, and I believe that. And yet, we do want to create space where people often wish it was true before they believe it's true.
I think this is a good point to open it up, see if anybody has any questions from the crowd before we ask our last one. All right, last question. Probably the most complex for you.
Gosh.
What's a simple way to answer tonight's question?
I'm assuming I asked the question 2 different ways, right? Is it arrogant to believe it, or how can it be loving to believe it? Is it arrogant? Something is not arrogant if the focus of what you believe is not about you. And so the way you explain Christianity to someone should never make you the hero. Even when you evangelism should not be, I was really lost and I was a mess, and now look at me. Jesus can do that for you too. Like this self-help project that's like, aspire to have what happened in my life happen in your life. The reality is the best evangelistic conversations I have had in my life is when my life fell apart back in 2018. And I had nothing and nothing was going right for me. And yet still by God's grace, I loved the Lord. That he kept me and sustained me, that I didn't just slip and stay into some kind of depression. How could I have hope whenever it felt like I lost everything? That's only by the grace of God. So how can it be saying Jesus is the only way to God? How is that not arrogant? Make yourself the citizens of Metropolis, not Superman, in the way you talk about your Christianity. I was lost. I was the villain that Jesus turned and died to save. Because if it's about him, Jesus can stand up and he deserves to be. It's not arrogant for him to be who he says he is because we believe that he is.